You preached through the book of Revelation. What was the scariest part?
Listening to the way people interpret it was by far the scariest part. Like the things people think, the things people say, the things, oh yeah, well of course, blah, 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 blah. It's pretty like, I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff in Revelation, but the way people interpret it is even crazier. And, I came across a quote similar to that. G.K. Chesterton said this. He said, "And though St. John the Evangelist saw many strange monsters in his vision, he saw no creature as wild as one of his own commentators." And man, we have goofed up Revelation in a million ways. And if you preach it, people are going to come at you with some crazy. So buckle up.
Hey, welcome to the Preaching Through podcast. This is the conversation all about preaching God's word in 21st century Earth, not just America, 21st century humanity. Draw people towards Jesus.
Yay, Earth.
Yay, Earth.
Someday people on Mars will be listening to this and just want to tell you we have it better than you do.
We want to be one voice in the conversation. We're better together. We're better in numbers. And we had a recent training day where we opened up the conversation on elder team healthy dynamics. That was a lot of really great questions. It gave way to a lot of really great discussions. And we got to mastermind some solutions together. And that's what we want to do in this conversation. And this one is all about the book of Revelation. We preached through that at our church in Mesa, Arizona. It's like the Mesa, Gilbert, Queen Creek area, Ironwood. And that's what we're going to talk about. So the first question that I have for you is, what was the original thought in choosing to do Revelation? Where did that desire come from?
It emerged for me in 2020. And so I was part of the group that was helping figure out what we preached at different points. And during 2020, one of my seminary professors reached out to everybody who was alumni and said, "Hey, we're all doing stuff on Zoom and whatever, and I've been studying Revelation a lot, and I'm gonna just do like a free thing on Revelation. Anybody wants to take it, you can." And at that time, with COVID and is the vaccine the mark of the beast, there was a lot of that conversation, and that's not what the class was about. But I was intrigued by that element of it. But as much as anything, just had a little more time on my hands and thought, this world is on fire right now. What would the book of Revelation have to say about this? And it was just crazy, Dave. As I went through that class, I went, this is so relevant. And not so relevant as it related to the specifics of 2020, the election or COVID or race relations, but just in relation to the idea that there is always Babylon. There is always the kingdom of the world. And there are lots of different versions of it, and there are lots of different forms of it. And it comes, but eventually it is going to be conquered by the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And that is ultimately the most important reality that is coming in the future, and that is actually inviting the church to live now in light of that reality. And so Christians, we don't just wait for that day to come, but we actually live as ambassadors of the kingdom of Christ now. And so it was during that time that I went, man, this is so relevant. This is so timely. I think this actually would not just be interesting, but it would actually help us to live faithfully as God's people. So that's when we started to think about what would it look like to put it on the calendar. Now, we also realized to be able to prepare to preach Revelation well is going to take a little more work than it would take to preach Ephesians, for instance. So we did a lot more advanced planning, a lot more advanced reading. We're able to actually bring in that seminary professor to do like an extended training for us. And so we did some stuff there that was very helpful, and it really turned out to be a great series.
So lots of different believers and non-believers have their take on the book of Revelation and what it means for them and how to interpret it. In the same way, there's all sorts of different ways you could approach preaching the book of Revelation. And I'm sure it's been taught in a myriad of different ways. What are those different ways? And then how would you characterize the approach we took at Ironwood?
The big decision that you've got to make if you're going to preach Revelation is your pace. And that's true if you're going to preach any book of the Bible sequentially. And so you've got to figure that out. And so, Revelation's a long book, and you could certainly, if you were going to just go through it verse by verse, you could spend, a long time, and plenty of people have done that sort of thing. We decided we wanted to keep it big picture. And so we thought about it less like preaching verse by verse and more as it preaching image by image. And so what you find in the book of Revelation is that there are actually these scenes or these images. And because Revelation is so much communicating through the imagery of it, we wanted to try to keep those images together as units. And so we went through it a bit more aggressively. I think we did 11 or 12 weeks, and we'll post the exact way that we broke it out in the show notes to this. And so we can do that. You also have to make a choice. What are you going to do about the 7 churches in Revelation 2 and 3? We made the decision to just preach that all as one week, though certainly that would be something that would make a ton of sense to preach one church at a time, and that would make the series a bit longer. But that's how we wanted to approach it. We wanted to do more big picture. Let's keep the forest more in view than the specifics of the trees. We thought that would help us make the main point that Revelation is trying to make. I don't think Revelation wants you to get bogged down in all the specific details as much as it wants to invite you to change your perspective based on the macro theme. So I think actually taking a bigger picture view helps you be more faithful to the intended meaning of it. But that would be the decision you'd have to make as you decide how do you want to get into it.
At the beginning of every message over the course of the 12 weeks or so that the series ran, the big picture that I got was how each message was started out. It was one statement that was read, and not only did that impact my interpretation and understanding of Revelation, but it's actually carried over to my overall understanding of Scripture. Do you want to share what that statement was?
It's this: Revelation was not written to us, but it was written for us. Revelation wasn't written to us, but it was written for us. And in a sense, you could say that about every book of the Bible, right? That's your point. But for whatever reason, people just haven't totally considered that. And so it's just important to realize Revelation had an intended audience, and we're eavesdropping in on that audience. This is for us. It is certainly for the church. It's designed in God's providence to be read and to be used and to be understood and to be applied by God's people forever. But to realize, like, it's written in a way, and it's written with certain reference points that are not our natural language, right? And so the thing that we would then often say out of that is, therefore, it can't mean for us what it didn't mean to them, right? If it was written to them, then it can't mean to us what it didn't mean to them. And so there might be things that we understand additionally, but it doesn't mean it just like, here's what the author meant to those people, but we finally figured it out 2,000 years later what it actually meant, and really all along they were just going, I don't have no idea what's this Revelation about, right? Like, that's not how it worked. Like, you want to go to the book of Revelation assuming the people who heard this, the people who read it, understood it. And so we have to actually do the work to go, what did they understand it to mean? Because it can't mean to us what it didn't mean to them. A few years ago, a new pastor joined our team. He'd been on staff at another church for a number of years, had a lot of experience preaching. And before he preached for the first time at our church, I said, hey, after your sermon, we'll sit down and just debrief it and talk it through. And we did that. And I was able to give him some coaching feedback that just to me felt totally normal. But afterward, he said something that blew my mind. He said, I got more feedback from you after that one sermon than I've gotten all these other years that I've been involved in preaching. Now, that stunned me. I grew up in an environment where you got lots of feedback, you got lots of coaching, but I realized that's actually not a common experience for most pastors. Most of us, we only get a little bit of a, hey, pastor, that was pretty good, or we get a nasty email, neither one of which are very helpful. And so I've created an experience where you can have the same kind of experience that he had, getting some tangible feedback as well as some really practical instruction on how to build and craft and deliver great sermons that are consistent week after week. I want to encourage you, I want to help you, and I want to come alongside any way I can. You don't need an overhaul, but a few small tweaks might go a long way to helping you be the preacher God made you to be, helping you find your voice, and helping you to serve the people God's called you to lead. So that's what the Preaching Lab Live is all about. To find out more, go to faithfulandfruitful.com/lab.
As we were planning the episode, there's all sorts of different ways we could approach it. We could approach it week by week by week. Probably just do a podcast on that. We could approach it from all of the resources, but we chose to approach it. What are your main takeaways from preaching the book of Revelation? The first one that you listed was that it's an attractional series.
there are just a reality of like people are interested in this and they want to come. Christians are interested, non-Christians are interested, their friends are interested. I mean, a lot of people who would have any kind, I mean, there are of course people who aren't interested in anything related to Christianity, but if anyone has some sort of pulse there, they're intrigued. And the number of people who told me like, I've never heard anything about this and I'm so curious, was really pretty interesting. And so I think it's great when a church can, at different points throughout the year, have some come and see type series. Like,
are you talking seeker sensitive?
Oh, I'm certainly not talking seeker insensitive. So sure, yeah. And I mean, sometimes that's relationships or sometimes that's parenting or sometimes that's, but what's really fun is to have like, hey, we're going to preach through a book of the Bible and people are like, can I come? Like, that's pretty stinking sweet. And so our church grew numerically through the series. I think we grew spiritually. We can talk about that more in a moment. But even like, I think about a lot of de-churched people who are kind of haunted by like, maybe there's more to life than this. And just so many people said, I've never heard a series on this. And I've always wished that someone would preach a series on this. And there's two guys that I've been working with in the last year or two that at the time of this recording are both right now preaching through the book of Revelation. I just texted them the other day and said, hey, how's it going? Independently of each other. I don't think they even know each other. And they both were like, oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. I'm loving it. It's one of my favorite series I've ever done. People are really engaged with it. It's an attractional thing. And I love the idea of attracting people with scripture, not with gimmicks, not with, whatever, but with the word.
It's not just attractional. You have your second takeaway. You already alluded to it, growing spiritually. It is a discipleship series too.
Some people have said there's two different kinds of series. There's attractional ones, come and see, and there's discipleship ones, go and die. What's awesome about Revelation, it's both. It's actually both, right? Because the come and see of it is that people are intrigued and what does this mean? And is that like that weird movie with the guillotine I watched when I was a kid? And, help me understand this.
Wait, what movie is that?
I don't know what it's called, but it scared the frick out of everybody.
I guess.
I mean, it was like the people who got left behind were eventually going to have the guillotine or something. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
But like, so there's the attractional part, but there is a go and die. I mean, what Revelation is calling you to do is to yield yourself not to the powers of Babylon, but to the powers of the Lamb and to live for him. And so it's a discipleship thing. I mean, it's a call to be faithful. It's a call to suffer. It's a call to overcome the temptation to compromise. And so I found that through the series, not only did our numbers grow, but our convictions about what matters, our convictions of living faithfully in a world that is not that interested in the Lord, those deepened. And so I think it didn't just grow us spiritually, or numerically, but it grew spiritually too.
One of the ways, I don't know that this necessarily like connects, but it's what I'm thinking about right now, really lasted with me. What is Jesus looking for in his church? What does he want to see? What is it that he is seeking out? And it was like faith.
Yeah.
Like that's what he wants to see. That's what he's looking for. And just that stuck with me. And as I read the Gospels, and as I read even the Old Testament, you read the epistle, like faith is just like the I was reading in Luke and the seed being cast and it gets in the soil. I was like, well, what is that soil? Well, that soil is faith. That's what cultivates it. I mean, I don't know if that's what it's supposed to be, but like as I'm reading about it, like, man, when the good news lands in rich soil that is just faith and willing to trust and put hope in Jesus, it's like, that's where it can grow. And that's where it can, burst forth new life. And it was just like, yes, discipleship series 2, life-giving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Third is it teaches people to read the Bible.
This is really something to put some work into on the front end, because what makes Revelation really challenging is that it is actually 3 distinct genres of literature. I mean, a lot of times we don't think about it this way, but most books of the Bible, it's a letter, right? It's prophetic, it's apocalyptic, it's narrative, it's whatever. The book of Revelation is 3 different kinds. The book of Revelation is apocalyptic, which is a whole genre, right? That doesn't just mean it's predicting the future, but apocalyptic literature. You can think about the end of Daniel. There's other non-canonical books that are apocalyptic literature. It's a whole genre, and it always involves lots of imagery, lots of pictures, that sort of a thing. And so the book of Revelation is apocalyptic. And the idea of apocalyptic literature is it's always trying to answer two questions, which is who rules the world and history, and where is history going, and will God's purpose prevail within that? And so I thought this was a great quote I read by someone in the preparation, was that apocalypse was intended to interpret present earthly circumstance in light of the supernatural world and of the future, and to influence both the understanding and behavior of the audience by means of divine authority. So it's this genre that's using strange imagery to challenge you, right? So it's apocalyptic literature, but it's also prophetic literature. And prophetic literature is addressing a historical situation and calling the people of God to be faithful in the midst of whatever this situation is. So it's apocalypse, it's prophecy. We think usually about prophecy being like predictive. And there's an element for sure of that in the book of Revelation, but it's especially calling you to be faithful in a particular situation, much like many of the Old Testament prophets are. And then third, it's also a letter, right? It's written first and foremost to these churches in Asia who are trying to resist compromising with Roman idolatry. And so it's all three different kinds. And so that's what we said earlier. Like the original readers would have largely understood this book because they understood a letter. They were familiar with the genre of apocalyptic literature, and they were familiar with the idea of prophetic literature. And so getting into that actually is helping people learn to read the Bible. And what it reveals is that the instinct that a lot of us have, and this is a very good instinct, I'm glad a lot of people have this, the instinct is to, well, I need to take the Bible literally. But that's not exactly the best way to read Revelation, right? Even talking about it that way, like you need to take this as true, but to take it literally would be like the actual way to like take the Revelation literally is to understand what those apocalyptic images meant to the original hearers. It doesn't mean, like to, interpret it in some weird way. So it just really did invite people to read the scriptures. Even like you mentioned the thing at the beginning, that thing we said every week, like this wasn't written to us, but it was written for us. One of the things we did through the series was a Q&A night where, and this was nice, just a little tip, if you decide to preach Revelation, if you want to keep your small groups from going constantly off the rails as they're doing sermon-based discussion, make sure you create like a Q&A night with you or with the other pastors. And it'll make it where your group leaders can say, hey, you know what, that's a really interesting question. Why don't you go to the Q&A night and they'll address that there. And one of the first questions that came up in that night was, hey, you're saying this wasn't written to us, but it is written for us. Is that true of the rest of the Bible? And it was like, well, actually, yes. And so we got a chance to teach people to read the scriptures. And man, I just think, like, I don't want to just have people that come and are encouraged by the preaching. I actually think how cool that you're learning to read the Bible for yourself through this process.
The fourth one, I remember texting you, and I don't know if we were texting or we were chatting, but the idea was just like, some of this imagery is wild.
Yeah.
And you'd kind of communicate, honestly, man, some of it is just like, I don't know exactly what this means, but I know what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's your fourth takeaway is that Revelation presents a clear contrast and choice.
Certain images, I mean, you read the commentators, and again, like Chesterton said, like some of the commentators are the scariest thing about the book, And so you read different parts, you're like, I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know exactly what that means. But when you zoom out, actually, Revelation is not that complicated, right? Like the main point is crystal clear over and over. It's that we are facing a fork in the road. We will go one of two directions. We will be marked by the beast or by the lamb. We will live for Babylon or we'll live for the New Jerusalem. We will have the good life now or we will have eternal life forever. We will face eternal judgment or glory. It's this or it's that. Which do you want? And so, I think by not taking it too slow and getting too bogged down in the weeds, we're able to keep that main thing the main thing, right? If this is a letter written to these Christians who are tempted to compromise with Roman idolatry, then it makes sense that even though they might understand all the nuances of a particular image, the point is the same. Don't follow the way of the dragon, follow the way of the lamb. Don't follow Babylon, follow the way of New Jerusalem. Don't compromise, be faithful, right? So that clear choice, and I think especially in a world right now that is so confused and everything is complex and everything is nuanced and everything is complicated, to go, hey, this is not that complex. Follow Jesus. It's the good life. That clarifying message, and especially when you're able to do that from something that on the surface seems to people like, I could never understand this. And then to go, actually, you totally could understand this. It's really simple. It's A or B. What you going to do? So I love the clarity and the contrast of the book.
And then number 5 is that it does keep the main thing as the main thing.
One of the things we decided early in the series was, there's just some things we want to say almost every week. So we've already talked about one of them, but a few others that we said almost every week is we said Revelation isn't as much about predicting as it is about preparing. Right? Revelation is preparing you to be faithful as God's people. Now, it's not necessarily, its main goal isn't to predict all these things about the future that you need to be worried about. And so we just said that over and over. Revelation isn't as much about predicting as it is about preparing. And then another thing we said, and I got this from a friend of mine, Larry Osborne, he said, when it comes to the return of Christ, we are not on the planning committee, we're on the welcoming committee. And so we're not going to take an approach about trying to map out, and here's the chart, and here's the exact sequence of how exactly Jesus is going to return. We're not on the planning committee. We're on the welcoming committee. Our job is to be faithful, to be ready, so that when he comes, he finds people that have faith. By keeping those things, the main thing over and over, we're just able to say that over and over, keep pounding that home. And again, rather than getting really distracted by all the, challenging parts of Revelation, we're able to actually keep the main thing and drive people towards simple obedience.
Number 6 is that it stretches you as a preacher. I'm curious, how did it stretch you as a preacher?
Yeah, I mean, there's just certain books where you go like, man, if I'm going to preach that, I'm going to have to really do some work. Because what I find is I don't feel the pressure as a preacher to include everything in every sermon. But there are things where I go, I might get a question about that. And if I'm talking to someone after the service, I'd like to not sound like a moron about it. And so like going, okay, this is going to stretch me. And there's definitely parts of scripture, like you've preached it before, you've studied it a million times before. You kind of like the well is really deep there. Revelation, my well wasn't very deep. I mean, I'd read it before and I'd taken a class on it in seminary, but like I didn't feel very fluent in it. Apocalyptic literature just itself is challenging for us to understand. I mean, if John was writing the same book to try to connect with us, he would pick different images. And so these images feel very distant and they feel very foreign, and it feels complex. So yeah, I just think it stretched me, but I like that, and if you're willing to humble yourself and willing to put some work in and willing to like go, all right, I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to keep growing. I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to have to explore what are these different views. The challenge is there's way more to possibly go into on Revelation than you want to have to do, right? And I don't think you need to be an expert on every view of the millennium or every view of the tribulation or something like that. But you do need to have enough knowledge of it so that when people come talk to you about it, you know what you're talking about and you can help them, right? So it's not just about saving face. It's actually about trying to help them focus on the main thing. But yeah, I love the way that it stretched me. And I think that's some of the guys that I mentioned who are preaching this now, that's some of what they're liking is like, you can't mail this one in. Deep down, we don't want to mail it in. We want to do the work and put something together and craft something and be happy with a finished product. And I think that's what this series allows you to do.
If you're curious as to what that process looks like, we have an entire episode, about 11 episodes in. So scroll down on your podcast feed. You'll see how to prepare a sermon. And Luke goes through his entire preparation journey and a lot of the early reading months ahead, just really taking in a lot of stuff. He goes into detail there. And if this is something that you are interested in preaching, or maybe a book or a topic that you are not as fluent in, it will give you some insight into how you can gain some fluency.
And one of the things we can put in the show notes, again, that's faithfulandfruitful.com/404 is links to some books and to some resources that were really helpful because, they're not all created equal. And there's also some there's some articles that we posted online for our people, so you can kind of see how we did that. And if that's something you would want to copy or imitate, you could do that as well. There's some podcast episodes we did throughout it. We can link to those.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Another thing we can do is actually the seminary professor that we had and come do the training on Revelation. It's about a 4 or 5 hour thing. We captured it on video.
Oh, cool.
And I have the link to that. And so I don't own that YouTube account. So if that YouTube account at some point goes away, then it will go away. But at least for now, I can find that and we can include that and post it there as well. So, I mean, you could get, that content and it would help you prepare for a series like this.
7th, this was your final takeaway, is that Revelation helps us reimagine eternity.
One of the things that just is so sad to me, Dave, is that so many Christians are still stuck in this idea that eternal life is going to heaven when you die. That's just not the story of the Bible, is that the end of history is we all go to heaven. That's not how it goes. The real end of history is that heaven comes to earth. And so, yes, until the Lord returns and until he makes all things new, which is what's talked about at the end of the book of Revelation, until that happens, if you're a Christian, you die and you'll go be with the Lord. But what that's saying is that actually us going to heaven is like a layover. I love to travel, and you and I have talked about different trips we take, and we imagine different places. No one, right? Like you went to Alaska, visited some family this past summer, and as you were preparing for that trip, I can't imagine that what you were really excited about was the hour and a half you had to spend in Seattle on the way up to Anchorage. There's no way. What you were excited about was Anchorage. I'm excited to go to Alaska. I'm excited to see the beauty of it. I'm excited to see where my family is, right? It's that final destination that actually grips your heart. It's not the layover. The layover is like, whatever.
You even debate on whether or not, I did go to North Dakota once in a layover, but was I actually in North Dakota?
Didn't even count.
Doesn't count. I didn't get the Starbucks mug.
Yeah, and so for our hope to be that we go to heaven, I mean, certainly I love it from the standpoint of what it is we're going to be with Jesus, and what could be better than that, being with Jesus. But actually what Revelation says is, there is something better than that. It's being with Jesus in a new heavens and a new earth, in a resurrected body, in a recreated world. Like, wow. I mean, so I just think like having a reimagination for that, having a sense of like, hey, God doesn't make junk, and God doesn't junk what he makes. And he's going to make this new. And as dark as the world is, as confusing as the world is, if you stick with Jesus, if you follow the way of the Lamb, if you live for the New Jerusalem instead of for Babylon, like, it is going to be great in the end. And so hang in there. And so I love painting that biblical picture. I love reframing people's thinking, helping get them out of a kind of, Greek Platonic thought of like, I need to leave my body and go to heaven, and go, no, that's not the biblical story. The biblical story is heaven and earth, made new. I heard a thing recently where someone had posted, I think on Twitter, they said, in one word, how would you describe heaven? And my favorite answer was someone wrote back, Eden. I was like, yes, that's it. It's heaven and earth made new with the presence of God. Oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing. So I loved how the book of Revelation expanded our imagination, expanded our sense of what it is to stay faithful to God, challenged me as a preacher. I mean, there's just so much that it did, and I'm really, really grateful for it. And so I would say if you're thinking about preaching it, if this is inspiring, go for it. And you probably need to do a little bit of work with your elders, with your pastors, with your team, to make sure the way you preach it is aligned with your theological distinctives and that sort of thing. And you certainly don't want to wing this. You're going to need to do some work and do some prep. And like we said, we'll have some resources to help you do that. But man, it's worth tackling, and it's one of my favorite series I've ever done.
Do you have has it even crossed your mind, maybe when you were planning or now, when will you ever preach Revelation again? Do you have any you could say no. I'm guessing no. It hasn't crossed your mind, but does it?
I haven't thought about it, but I could see us doing it again in 7 or 8 years.
Because there's different pacings you could do, like we talked about.
Yeah, I could certainly see us doing the 7 churches of Revelation as its own series. But I could see doing the whole book. I mean, because it only was 12 weeks, like that's not like a 3-year journey. They're like, I'm never doing that 3-year journey again. We could totally do it. And I think however relevant it is right now in 2024, in 2034, I can imagine if the Lord hasn't returned yet, it's going to still be pretty dang relevant. So yeah, I see it as a series we could do every decade. It'd be really, really fun to do it again.
You said that you could do a series on the 7 churches. Is there anything else that we could do this next time?
In terms of like how you would do like a sub-series out of it?
Yeah, well, the original question I have, which I didn't, I was like, this is a terrible way to end it, but cards on the table. Basically asking you, did you regret anything that you omitted or anything that you would do different? I was like, man, he just gave this great reimagining eternity. I don't know. What were your regrets about? But like, is there anything that looking back, you're like, we could do this differently, or we could do it that way, or I wish we would have had time for this. We just didn't have time.
Not really. I mean,
well, that's a good place to be.
Yeah. I mean, like, when I was putting together the sermon on the churches and I was feeling the crunch of how do you summarize these 7 letters to these 7 churches and put it into one message and distill it down for 35 minutes, that week I was thinking, gosh, I wish we had done it as 7 weeks. So, I mean, that's certainly the case. This is a series where you're going to have to leave plenty on the cutting room floor. And so that part is always painful. But I think actually keeping the big picture, I liked it that way. I mean, it'd be interesting to maybe go a touch slower, but I wouldn't go much slower. Like, I think other than breaking out the letters themselves, I don't know that I would have added maybe more than 3-4 weeks max.
That's not a bad place to be. I was like, yeah, I like the way this went.
Yeah, I was happy with it.
So as Luke mentioned, you can get all of the resources that we're going to make available for this at faithfulandfruitful.com/404. In addition to the show notes, in addition to the breakdown, I'll also put the playlist for the series that we did. And it'll have all the episodes in there so you can see the breakdown, but you could also check out some of the messages and see what was synthesized from some of other resources that we're going to list. Is there anything else you would want to share or say to preachers considering the book of Revelation or finding themselves in it or upon it?
I just really think you won't regret it. I mean, you could regret it if you do it poorly. You could regret it if you're not aligned with your leadership. But if you're aligned with your leadership and you plan it and you put the work in, I think this will be a really fruitful thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, Preaching Through Podcast. Season 4, episode 4. Wow, it's been quite a few episodes, and they're a lot of fun. If this is the first time ever listening, there is an entire collection of episodes that we have worked really hard to make them evergreen as we've gone along. So as shy of a reference here or there, it's really going to be applicable, hopefully, to the time and the place where you're at. And I encourage you to go check them out. If there's anything that we can help you with or any questions that you have follow-up, info@faithfulandfruitful.com. And of course, you can always go to the show notes, faithfulandfruitful.com/404. And from there, you can find other resources. Thanks so much for listening. And looking forward to episode 5 coming your way next time.